All right, good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to day 8 of Lord of the Flies. So, if you remember, we were reading chapter 6. We stopped at page 100. I will pick up at 101. So, the title of this chapter was Beasts from the Air. So, I was looking at, before I get started, I was looking ahead of the schedule a little bit to see how we were doing, and we were actually pretty good on this book and ahead of schedule. So we'll have a couple shorter days coming up. I'm sure listening to me read for 40 minutes is kind of driving you guys crazy. So I'm going to start shortening it up a little bit, and we are doing okay. So give you guys an idea of where we're at. So day 8, we will finish chapter 6, and then I will go over some questions. Chapter 7 is a little bit of a shorter chapter, so we might read all of chapter 7 in one sitting. We'll see how that goes. Maybe break it up into 2, but probably read all one. Chapter 8 I will probably break up into 2 sessions, so we'll have one shorter day, and then I will go over some questions. So we might be, so chapter 7, look at day 9, chapter 8, day 10, and day 11. Chapter 9 is a short chapter, so we might take a day in between to have another discussion day after chapter 8. We'll see, but we might have 1 or 2 more discussion days to break this up. Chapter 10 we'll probably do, we may break up, may not. Chapter 11 we will break up into 2 days, and chapter 12 we will also break up into 2 days. So that's what we're looking at right now, with a day of discussion probably in there. Like, I'll FaceTime and call you guys like I did last week, probably at least 1 more time, maybe 2 more times. Keep in mind, summer school is 20 days, but on the 20th day, it is pickup day. So there's probably not a whole lot of school to do for pickup day. So with that being said, as you guys can hear my kids in the background, because they're not being quiet. So with that being said, let's get started on this finishing chapter 6. All right, here we go. So remember, the twins came and were talking about the beast they saw, the beast from the air. What was it? We don't really know. So, and then Jack was talking about going on a hunt. They called a little meeting, and everybody was frightened. So here we go. Top of 101. He turned to the twins, yearning but hopeless. "I suppose you aren't pulling our legs." The reply was too empathetic for anyone to doubt them. Piggy took the conch. "Couldn't we kind of stay here? Maybe the beast won't come near us." But for the sense of something watching them, Ralph would have shouted at him. "Stay here!" And he cramped into his bit of the island, always on the lookout. "How should we get our food? And what about the fire?" "Let's be moving," said Jack relentlessly. "We're wasting time." "No, we're not. What about the little uns?" "Sucks to the little uns. Someone's got to look after them." "Nobody has so far." "There was no need. Now there is. Piggy'll look after them." "That's right. Keep Piggy out of danger." "Have some sense. What can Piggy do with only one eye?" The rest of the boys were looking from Jack to Ralph, curiously. "And another thing. You can't have an ordinary hunt because the beast doesn't leave tracks. If it did, you'd have seen them. For all we know, the beast may swing through the trees like what's-its-name." They nodded. "So we've got to think." Piggy took off his damaged glasses and cleaned the remaining lens. "How about us, Ralph? You haven't got the comp. Here. I mean, how about us? Suppose the beast comes when you're all away. I can't see proper, and if I get scared," Jack broke in contemptuously. "You're always scared. I got the conch." "Conch, conch," shouted Jack. "We don't need the conch anymore. We know who ought to say things. What good did Simon do speaking, or Bill, or Walter? It's time some people knew they've got to keep quiet and leave deciding things to the rest of us." Ralph could no longer ignore his speech. The blood was hot in his cheeks. "You haven't got the conch," he said. "Sit down." Jack's face went so white with the freckles showed as clear brown flecks. He licked his lips and remained standing. This is a hunter's job. The rest of us boys watched intently. Piggy, finding himself uncomfortably embroiled, slid the conch to Ralph's knees and sat down. The silence grew oppressive, and Piggy held his breath. This is more than a hunter's job, said Ralph at last, because you can't track the beast and you don't want to be rescued. He turned to the assembly. Don't you all want to be rescued? He looked back at Jack. I said before, the fire is the main thing. Now the fire must be out. The old exasperation saved him and gave him the energy to attack. Hasn't anyone got any sense? We've got to relight that fire. You never thought of that, Jack, did you? Or don't any of you want to be rescued? Yes, they want to be rescued. There was no doubt about that. And with a violent swing to Ralph's side, the crisis passed. Piggy let out his breath with a gasp, reached for it again, and failed. He lay against a log, his mouth gaping, blue shadows creeping round his lips. Nobody minded him. Now think, Jack. Is there anywhere on the island you haven't been? Unwillingly, Jack answered. There's only... But of course, you remember, the tail end part where the rocks are all piled up. I've been near there. The rocks make a sort of bridge. There's only one way up, and the thing might live there. All the assembly talked at once. Quite all right. That's where we'll look. If the beast isn't there, we'll go up the mountain and look, and light the fire. Let's go. We'll eat first, then go. Ralph paused. We'd better take spears. After they had eaten, Ralph and the Biggins set out along the beach. They left Piggy propped up on the platform. This day promised, like the others, to be a sunbath under a blue dome. The beach stretched away before them in a gentle curve till perspective drew it into one with the forest, for the day was not advanced enough to be obscured by the shifting veils of mirage. Under Ralph's direction, they picked up a careful way along the palm terrace, rather dare the hot sand down by the water. He let Jack lead the way, and Jack trod with the theatrical caution, though they could have seen an enemy 20 yards away. Ralph walked in the rear, thankful to have escaped responsibility for a time. Simon, walking in front of Ralph, felt a flicker of incredulity, a beast with claws that scratched, that sat on a mountaintop, that left no tracks and yet was not fast enough to catch Sam and Eric. However, Simon thought of the beast. There rose before his inward sight the picture of a human at once heroic and sick. He sighed. Other people could stand up and speak in assembly, apparently, without that dreadful feeling of the pressure of personality. Could say what they would as they were speaking to only one person. He stepped aside and looked back. Ralph was coming along, holding his spear over his shoulder. Diffidently, Simon allowed his pace to slacken until he was walking side by side with Ralph and looking up at him through the coarse black hair that now fell into his eyes. Ralph glanced sideways, smiled constrainedly, as though he had forgotten that Simon had made a fool of himself, then looked away again at nothing. For a moment or two, Simon was happy to be accepted, and then he eased to think about himself. When he bashed into a tree, Ralph looked sideways, impatiently, and Robert sniggered. Simon reeled, and a white spot on his forehead turned red and trickled. Ralph dismissed Simon and returned to his personal hell. They would reach the castle sometime, and the chief would have to go forward. Jack came trotting back. We're in sight now. All right, we'll get as close as we can. He followed Jack toward the castle where the ground rose slightly. On their left was an impenetrable tangle of creepers and trees. Why couldn't there be something in that? Because you can see, nothing goes in or out. What about the castle then? Look. Ralph parted the screen of grass and looked out. There were only a few more yards of stony ground, and then the two sides of the island came almost together, so that one expected a peak of headland, but instead of this a narrow ledge of rock, a few yards wide and perhaps 15 long, continued the island out into the sea. There lay another of those pieces of pink squareness that underlay the structure of the island. This side of the castle, perhaps 100 feet high, was the pink bastion they had seen from the mountaintop. The rock of the cliff was split at the top, littered with great lumps that seemed to totter. Behind Ralph, the tall grass had filled with silent hunters. Ralph looked at Jack. "You're a hunter." Jack went red. "I know. All right." Something deep in Ralph spoke for him. "I'm chief. I'll go. Don't argue." He turned to the others. "You, hide here. Wait for me." He found his voice tended either to disappear or to come out too loud. He looked at Jack. "Do you think?" Jack muttered. "I've been all over. It must be here." "I see." Simon mumbled confusedly. "I don't believe in the beast." Ralph answered him politely, as if agreeing about the weather. "No, I suppose not." His mouth was tight and pale. He put back his hair very slowly. "Well, so long." He forced his feet to move until they had carried him out onto the neck of land. He was surrounded on all sides by chasms of empty air. There was nowhere to hide, even if no one did not have to go on. He paused on the narrow neck and looked down. Soon, in a matter of centuries, the sea would make an island of the castle. On the right hand was the lagoon, troubled by the open sea, and on the left, Ralph shuddered. The lagoon had protected them from the Pacific, and for some reason only Jack had gone right down to the water on the other side. Now he saw the landsman's view of the swell, and it seemed like the breathing of some stupendous creature. Slowly the water sank among the rocks, revealing pink tables of granite, strange growths of coral, polyp, and weed. Down, down, the waters went, whispering like the wind among the heads of the forest. There was one flat rock there, spread like a table, and the waters sucking down on the four weedy sides made them seem like cliffs. Then the sleeping Leviathan breathed out. The waters rose, the weeds streamed, and the water boiled over the table rock with a roar. There was no sense of passage of waves, only this minute-long fall and rise and fall. Ralph turned away to the red cliff. They were waiting behind him in the long grass, waiting to see what he would do. He noticed that the sweat in his palm was cool now, realized with surprise that he did not really expect to meet any beast, and didn't know what he would do about it if he did. Page 106. He saw that he could climb the cliff, but this was not necessary. The squareness of the rock allowed a sort of plinth round it, so that to the right, over the lagoon, one could inch along the ledge and turn the corner out of sight. It was easy going, and soon he was peering round the rock. Nothing but what you might expect: pink, tumbled boulders with guano layered on them like icing, and the steep slope up to the shattered rocks that crowned the bastion. A sound beneath him made him turn. Jack was edging along the ledge. Thank you. Couldn't let you do it on your own. Ralph said nothing. He led the way over the rocks, inspected a sort of half cave that held nothing more terrible than a clutch of rotten eggs, and at last sat down, looking around him and tapping the rock with the butt of his spear. Jack was excited. What a place for a fort! A column of spray wetted them. No fresh water. What's that then? There was indeed a long green smudge halfway up the rock. They climbed up and tasted the trickle of water. You could keep a coconut shell there, filling all the time. Not me. This is a rotten place. Side by side, they scaled the last height to where the diminishing pile was crowned by the last broken rock. Jack struck the near one with his fist, and it grated slightly. Do you remember? Consciousness of bad times in between came to them both. Jack talked quickly. Shove a palm under the trunk. Shove a palm trunk under that, and if an enemy came, look. 100 feet below was the narrow causeway, then the stony ground, then the grass dotted with heads, and beyond that the forest. One heave, Jack cried, exulting, and whee! He made a sweeping movement with his hand. Ralph looked toward the mountain. What's the matter? Ralph turned. Why? You were looking. I don't know why. There's no signal now. Nothing to show. You're nuts on the signal. The taut blue horizon encircled them, broken only by the mountaintop. That's all we've got. He leaned his spear against the rocking stone and pushed back 2 handfuls of hair. We'll have to go back and climb the mountain. That's where they saw the beast. The beast won't be there. What else can we do? The others, waiting in the grass, saw Jack and Ralph unarmed and broke cover into the sunlight. They forgot the beast in excitement of exploration. They swarmed across the bridge and soon were climbing and shouting. Ralph stood now, one hand against an enormous red block, a block large as a mill wheel that had been split off and hung, tottering. Somberly he watched the mountain. He clenched his fist and beat hammer-wise on the red wall at his right. His lips were tightly compressed, and his eyes yearned beneath the fringe of the hair. Smoke! He sucked his bruised fist. Jack, come on! But Jack was not there. A knot of boys making a great noise that he had not noticed were heaving and pushing at a rock. As he turned, the base cracked and the whole mass toppled into the sea so that a thunderous plume of spray leapt halfway up the cliff. Stop it! Stop it! His voice struck a silence among them. Smoke! A strange thing had happened in his head. Something flittered there in front of his mind like a bat's wing, obscuring his idea. Smoke! At once the ideas were back, and the anger. We want smoke, and you go wasting your time. You roll rocks? Roger shouted. We've got plenty of time. Ralph shook his head. We'll go to the mountain. The clamor broke out. Some of the boys wanted to go back to the beach. Some wanted to roll more rocks. The sun was bright and danger had faded with the darkness. Jack, the beast might be on the other side. You can lead again. You've been. We could go by the shore. There's fruit. Bill came up to Ralph. Why can't we stay here for a bit? That's right. Let's have a fort. There's no food here, said Ralph, and no shelter. Not much fresh water. This would make a wizard fort. We can roll rocks right onto the bridge. I say we'll go on. I say we'll go on, shouted Ralph furiously. We've got to make certain. We'll go now. Let's stay here. Back to the shelter. I'm tired. No. Ralph struck the skin of his knuckles. They did not seem to hurt. I'm chief. We've got to make certain. Can't you see the mountain? There's no signal showing. There may be a ship out there. Are all you off your rockers? Mutinously, the boys fell silent or muttering. Jack led the way down the rock and across the bridge. All right. That finishes chapter 6. So let's look at the questions for chapters 5 and 6 for a minute. All right. Chapter 5 and 6. Number 27. Which character has matured and is becoming more responsible during his time on the island? That one should be easy. Why didn't Sam and Eric notice the dead parachutist falling out of the sky? So that gives us a little hint of what might have happened, what they thought the beast was when they saw it land. And the descriptions in the beginning of chapter 6 kind of told us what it was. Remember, they are in the middle of a war, so the planes and stuff fighting over them. So hopefully you got the hint that it was a parachute person from a plane who did not made it. So why didn't they notice it? What were they doing? They were supposed to be watching the fire, but they did something else. Number 29, what do they go back and tell Ralph and Jack that they saw? Hopefully you know that one. So then what did they do? Which is what we just read about, is what did Ralph and Jack decide to do after the twins came and reported seeing that? And your question in number 30 gives your answer to number 29, hint. Number 31, Simon attempts to explain who the beast is. How does he explain this? So that was interesting. That was when Simon spoke. Is the beast really real? Is kind of what Simon was referring to. That's a good discussion question. And where did Percival say the beast came from? So that was chapter 5. All right, number 33. What evidence do you find that Jack is gaining control of the group while Ralph is losing control? So a lot of your hints are there in the end of chapter 6 for that answer. Number 34, what topic do Ralph, Jack, and Piggy try to address during the assembly? So remember in chapter 5 he called for that big assembly. What are they trying to address? What was the most of the discussion of the assembly about? And number 35, what realization does Ralph come to regarding Piggy? So Ralph kind of talked about Piggy a little bit in that discussion, in that chapter. And what did he realize that Piggy had? And like the good qualities of Piggy that he's just now realizing. And 36, what do Jack and the others want to do at the end of the search for the beast in chapter 6? So you got lots of options right there. To choose from. And then number 37, find examples of irony where something is said to be true yet you know it is not true in the book. So interesting to hear some of your answers for that, your examples of irony in the novel. Something is said to be true yet you know it is not true. So that is chapters 5 and 6. So we'll come back for day 9 tomorrow and read chapter 7. We'll see how far we get. We might split it up. We'll see. That's only 15 pages or so. We'll see what happens. I'll take a look at the schedule a little bit more in depth. So with that being said, we are finished with chapters 5 and 6. We are finished with day 8. And I will see you guys back here on, I guess, Friday for day 9. So, all right. We will talk to you all later. See ya.